if you're a fan of rock and roll, like I'm a fan of rock and roll, you gotta love the music of Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry's music is something I've known since I can remember having thoughts in my head. We had an 8-track player in my house. My father had grown up in the 50s, and that was his music. So we had these 8-tracks that were greatest hits of that era, and I always loved it, and I love it probably even more now than I did then. We have a new documentary out from MVD from 2018, new Blu-ray, entitled Chuck Berry, the Original King of Rock and Roll. This is a totally authorized biography from the Chuck Berry estate, the Berry family, so you get interviews with multiple family members, Chuck Berry's wife, Chuck Berry's kids, Chuck Berry's grandkids, and a lot of really big iconic names in rock and roll. You've got Alice Cooper, you've got Gene Simmons, Nils Lofgren, George Thorogood, John Bomassa, on and on and on. People telling you, and it's not just one of those movies where it's like, okay, you've got a bunch of famous people who tell you why somebody's cool. You get the story of Chuck Berry, you get people who worked with him, you get band members, and through archival interviews, you get some Chuck Berry himself. And it's a story that I'd heard to some degree. I'd seen Hail Hail Rock and Roll, which is an outstanding Taylor Hackford biopic concert movie, sort of. A lot of footage from that is used in this Chuck Berry documentary to show Chuck Berry, rehearsing with Keith Richards, and a little bit of him telling his story, because sadly the man is not around any longer to tell his story. You get that footage, you get the newly shot footage of interviews, you get archival footage of performances, and then you get some interesting newly shot impressionistic, I'm not sure quite what to call these. They'll be telling a story about something that happened in Chuck Berry's life, and they're these reenactments, but they're done with actors who are sort of also dancers, and it's desaturated black and white footage, but like one thing will be in color. I didn't particularly care for that stylized stuff myself. It sort of took me out of it a little bit. I would have been okay with I'm not a fan of reenactments personally, so no matter what you do, if you're doing a reenactment, it's probably not going to land well with me. So take that with a grain of whatever. But at its core, it's a celebration of Chuck Berry. It's a celebration of the man's music. When he talks about how many songs he wrote between getting signed for a contract and showing up to record, you're going to say, pardon? You wrote all of those indelible classics in the span of a day or two? Wow. Songs people are still playing. And I was a little mixed on this documentary. I love the subject matter. It doesn't shy away from the controversy in Chuck Berry's life. It doesn't really wallow in it because this is an official family-approved version. But they acknowledge that stuff, which I respected. The stories and the insights from the rock icons you hear are funny and interesting. And it's just cool to get a little bit deeper into a guy's life than I had been aware of before. I hadn't read any biographies or watched anything other than Hail Hail Rock and Roll, really. Ultimately, this carries on the strength of the music, which is great, the strength of his stage persona, which was always very playful. And it's just, I had a really good time with this. Now, I will get a little nitpicky, a tiny bit nitpicky about something in general that bugs me. I don't know how hard it is to source good quality archival footage anymore, but too often I see documentaries, sometimes in a theater, where the video is clearly just sourced from YouTube and looks terrible. And that keeps happening in this documentary, and it really suffers. We have a nice large 4K TV here at the house, and watching footage that's beautifully shot HD. The stuff that they shot with the reenactments looks great. The stuff they shot with interviews and family members, visiting old homes they lived in, or Berry Park, this park that he had built, looked gorgeous. And then you cut to a clip of him performing on European TV in the 60s, and it looks like, the lowest grade YouTube streaming video. And it's just like, whoa, that's really hard to look at. And I would love to know if there's extras on this disc. They're serious extras. There's like 100 minutes of the full interviews they did with most of the famous people. So you get like 20 minutes with Alice Cooper. You get like the full interview. It's very cool. I would love to know from any filmmakers, is there not a better option than really crappy looking YouTube footage? Because it really personally takes me out of a film, and especially when I see something like this theatrically and it's giant, it looks even worse. And it always just comes off as, it comes off as looking cheap or like you didn't try hard enough. And again, this is a really well-made film. It's just that technique that I see so often now of utilizing YouTube clips. It very well might be that's the only way to see that footage. And if that's the case, I get it. I just think personally, I would go for something else that looks better. And even stuff that I feel like I know I've seen better quality copies of, it was really strange to me to see YouTube-looking copies in a final product on a Blu-ray. So that aside, I would recommend this documentary if you love Chuck Berry, if you love rock and roll, or it's a great introduction to Chuck Berry and why he was iconic and so important. Out now from Blu-ray, from MVD on Blu-ray is Chuck Berry.